The ad promised impossible pay at a billionaire's isolated estate, but the one rule was to never speak to the son everyone called the ghost of the glass fortress. The advertisement was for a household assistant. It was discreet, posted on a university job board, and the pay was so ridiculously high it had to be a typo or a scam. But my student loans were a ravenous beast, and my final art project required materials I could only dream of, so I applied. The interview wasn't at some corporate office, it was at the Vance estate itself, a place locals called the Glass Fortress. It was less a house and more a monument to modernism and isolation, all sharp angles, sprawling windows, and cold, white marble that seemed to suck the warmth right out of the air. The man who hired me, Mr. Alistair Vance, was carved from the same stone as his house. He was a billionaire titan of the tech industry, with eyes that didn't just look at you, they assessed you, calculated your worth, and found you wanting. He spent maybe 5 minutes with me. He didn't care about my grades or my work ethic. He cared about one thing: discretion. Your duties will be managed by Mrs. Gable, the head housekeeper, he said, his voice a low hum of authority. But there is one rule that comes directly from me. It is absolute. My son, Julian, you are not to interact with him. You are not to speak to him unless he initiates, which he will not. You are to be a ghost in his presence. Do you understand? I nodded, my throat suddenly dry. I had heard whispers about the Vance son, a recluse, a tragedy. No one had seen him in public for years, not since he was a teenager. Mrs. Gable was a much sterner, more practical version of Mr. Vance. She walked me through the sprawling west wing. "This is Mr. Julian's suite," she said, gesturing to a set of imposing double doors. "You will clean it from 10 a.m. to 11:30 a.m., Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. He will be in his music therapy session at that time. You will not deviate from this schedule. You will touch nothing that is not a surface to be cleaned. His world is precise. We do not disturb it." For the first few weeks, I was that ghost. I moved through the silent, opulent halls, polishing surfaces that were already gleaming, dusting furniture no one ever sat on. The entire house felt like a museum, a beautiful, sterile place where life was not actively lived. And Julian's suite was the grandest, saddest exhibit of all. It had everything a 26-year-old man could want. The latest tech, a library of braille and audiobooks that took up an entire wall, a private gym. But the windows were always shuttered, casting the room in a perpetual twilight. The air was still, heavy with the scent of old paper and the expensive faint cologne he wore. He was a ghost, too, a prisoner in a palace. I learned about him in fragments. He'd lost his sight in a car accident when he was 16, the same accident that had killed his mother. After that, Alistair Vance had sealed him away from the world, a flawed piece of his legacy to be managed, not seen. He had tutors, therapists, and staff, an entire ecosystem designed to keep him comfortable, contained, and completely, utterly alone. My life outside the glass fortress was a chaotic mess of charcoal dust, turpentine, and looming deadlines. My final project was a series of large-scale tactile sculptures. I was obsessed with the idea of creating art that could be experienced without sight, using textures to evoke emotions, rough, jagged plaster for anger, smooth, cool river stones for peace, layers of coarse sand and velvet for memory. I'd carry small maquettes in my apron pocket, little clay and fabric studies I'd fiddle with on the bus. They were my connection to my real self in that sterile house. One Wednesday the schedule was broken. I entered Julian's suite at 10 a.m. sharp, my cleaning caddy rolling silently behind me. I expected the vast, empty quiet. Instead, I heard the soft, melancholic notes of a piano. I froze in the doorway, my heart hammering against my ribs. He was there, sitting at a grand piano in the far corner of the living area, his back to me. He wasn't supposed to be there. I was supposed to retreat, to call Mrs. Gable, to follow the protocol. But I couldn't move. He played beautifully, his long pale fingers dancing across the keys with a confidence that seemed at odds with the fragile stillness of his body. The music was heartbreakingly sad, a torrent of emotion in the otherwise silent house. I stood there, hidden in the shadows of the hallway, for what felt like an eternity, just listening. I was breaking the primary rule, but I felt like for the first time I was seeing the real Julian Vance, not the tragic myth. When the final note faded, the silence that rushed back in was even more profound than before. I took a shallow breath, trying to will myself to back away slowly. But in my nervousness, my hand brushed against my apron, and a small, experimental piece I'd been working on, a ball of clay embedded with sharp, tiny fragments of seashell slipped from my pocket. It hit the marble floor with a soft, yet distinct clatter. It wasn't loud, but in that tomb of a room, it sounded like a gunshot. The music had stopped. The silence was absolute. I saw his shoulders tense. He didn't turn around. He didn't call out. He just sat there, perfectly still, his head tilted slightly as if listening to the echo of the sound. I held my breath, my mind racing. I was going to be fired. Mr. Vance would probably sue me for emotional distress. This was it. Slowly, his head turned, not fully towards me, but in my general direction. His eyes, a pale, cloudy blue, were unsettling because they couldn't see me, yet I felt utterly exposed. His voice, when he finally spoke, was nothing like I'd imagined. It wasn't weak or frail. It was a low, resonant baritone, rusty from disuse but clear as a bell. And what he said chilled me to the bone. "You're the new one," he stated, not as a question, but as a fact. "You smell of linseed oil and damp earth. You hesitate for exactly 2 seconds before opening the door every morning." He paused, and his sightless gaze seemed to pierce right through me. "Tell me, what are you so afraid I'll find out?" My blood ran cold. He hadn't just heard me. He had been observing me, cataloguing me with senses I couldn't even fathom. The smell of my art supplies, the rhythm of my movements. I wasn't a ghost to him at all. I was an intrusion, a collection of scents and sounds in his meticulously ordered darkness. My fear of being fired was suddenly dwarfed by a profound, unnerving feeling of being truly seen. "I'm sorry, sir," I stammered, my voice a pathetic whisper. "I dropped something. I'll just pick it up and leave." "Your therapy session?" "It was cancelled," he cut in smoothly, his tone laced with a dry amusement that was somehow more intimidating than anger. "Dr. Albright has the flu, a fact Mrs. Gable apparently neglected to communicate down the chain of command." He still hadn't turned fully toward me, but I could feel the weight of his attention. "You didn't answer my question." I swallowed hard, my eyes darting to the small, lumpy ball of clay and shell fragments on the pristine marble. "I'm afraid of losing my job," I admitted, the truth feeling thin and inadequate. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Everyone in this house is afraid of losing their job. It's my father's preferred method of control. But your fear smells different. It's not just about the money." He gestured vaguely toward the floor in front of me. "What did you drop?" My mind scrambled for a plausible lie. A button? A coin? But he was too sharp for that. He had heard its specific clatter. "It's for a project," I said, inching forward to retrieve it. My fingers closed around the familiar, rough texture. "A project?" he echoed, the curiosity in his voice palpable. It was the first hint of anything other than melancholy or sardonic detachment I had heard from him. "Describe it." It was a command, not a request. I stood up straight, clutching the small object in my palm. "It's a maquette, a study, for a sculpture." I hesitated, then plunged ahead, figuring I had nothing left to lose. "My final project for my degree. I'm an art student. I'm making pieces that are meant to be touched, not just seen. This one, it's meant to feel like betrayal. The clay is smooth and yielding, but it's embedded with tiny, sharp pieces of broken shell. So when you hold it, it promises comfort, but delivers pain." The silence that followed was heavy and absolute. I watched his hands, which were resting on the piano keys. His long fingers curled slightly, as if imagining the texture I'd just described. He finally turned his body fully on the piano bench, facing me. His clouded blue eyes seemed to look straight through me, searching for something he couldn't see. "Betrayal," he repeated softly, his voice barely a murmur. "Show me." My breath hitched. "Sir, give it to me." He held out a hand, his palm open and upturned. It was a perfect, pale, artist's hand, unmarred by labor. This was the ultimate transgression. I was forbidden from interacting, and here he was, demanding I hand him a piece of my soul shaped in clay. I took a tentative step forward, then another, until I stood before him. My hand trembled as I placed the small, dangerous ball into his. His fingers closed around it instantly, exploring the surface with a breathtaking sensitivity. He didn't flinch at the sharp edges of the shells. Instead, his thumb traced them, one by one. I watched, mesmerized, as his expression shifted. A flicker of understanding, of something akin to recognition, crossed his face. It was an intensely private moment, and I felt like an intruder all over again. "More," he said, his voice low and urgent. "More? Bring me more of your projects," he clarified, his fingers still working over the maquette. "The ones that feel like something. Bring them when you come to clean. Don't tell Mrs. Gable. Don't tell anyone." He looked up, his sightless eyes pinning me in place. "This will be our secret. In return, I won't mention that you stand in my doorway for 2 seconds every morning, your heart beating like a trapped bird. Do we have an agreement?" And so it began. Our strange, silent conspiracy. 3 times a week I would enter his suite, not just as a cleaner, but as a curator of a secret exhibition. I brought him a piece of driftwood, sanded smooth by the ocean on one side and covered in rough, dry barnacles on the other. I told him it was loneliness. He held it for 10 minutes straight, his brow furrowed in concentration. I brought him a tangle of dried vines, brittle and interwoven, with soft velvet moss clinging to the joints. I called it a complicated memory. He spent the entire session mapping its twists and turns with his fingertips, a faint smile playing on his lips. His world, once a void of scheduled sounds and prescribed comforts, began to fill with textures. Through my art, I gave him a forest he could touch, a storm he could hold, a sorrow he could feel crumble in his hands. And in return, he gave me something I couldn't quite name, a purpose beyond scrubbing marble. In that sterile, silent wing of the house, we were building a new world together, one piece of tactile art at a time. I started living for those 30 minutes of shared, silent discovery. One Monday, I brought him my most ambitious piece yet, a block of beeswax, still smelling faintly of honey, that I had warmed and molded. Into it, I had pressed dozens of small, cold, perfectly round glass beads. I called it Hope. He was tracing the pattern of cool glass against the warm, yielding wax, a look of serene focus on his face, when the double doors to the suite swung open without a sound. I hadn't heard her approach. I spun around, my heart leaping into my throat. Mrs. Gable stood in the doorway, her hands clasped behind her back, her posture ramrod straight. Her eyes, small and sharp as a hawk's, flickered from the beeswax sculpture in Julian's hands to my face. An expression of pure, cold fury settled over her features. Her voice, when she spoke, cut through our fragile secret world like a shard of ice. "Miss Miller," she said, her tone dangerously quiet. "What exactly do you think you're doing?" The block of beeswax felt suddenly heavy in Julian's hands. He didn't drop it, but his fingers went still, the exploration ceasing instantly. The peaceful atmosphere we had built shattered into 1,000 tiny, sharp pieces. The air thickened with unspoken accusations. I felt the blood drain from my face, my carefully constructed world collapsing under Mrs. Gable's glacial stare. I started, but the words died in my throat. What could I say? I'm conducting a secret art therapy session with the boss's son, directly violating the one and only rule I was given. I was caught, red-handed, in the middle of the most forbidden act in the entire Vance estate. "You were what, Miss Miller?" Mrs. Gable took a slow, deliberate step into the room. Her sensible shoes made no sound on the marble. "Communicating with Mr. Julian, providing him with objects." Her gaze landed on the beeswax sculpture with undisguised contempt. It was as if I'd handed him a venomous snake. Julian finally spoke, his voice calm and steady, a stark contrast to the frantic pounding of my heart. She was cleaning Mrs. Gable. She found something on the floor. I asked her what it was. It was a lie, a thin one, but it was a shield, and he had raised it for me. It was the first time he had ever defended me, ever acknowledged my presence to another living soul. Mrs. Gable's lips thinned into a bloodless line. She wasn't buying it for a second. "Mr. Julian, you know the rules your father has set, for your own well-being. This young woman was instructed not to interact with you in any capacity." She turned her steely gaze back to me. "Her employment is terminated, effective immediately. Please gather your things and report to my office. I will have security escort you from the premises." Panic, cold and absolute, seized me. My job, my tuition money, my art project, all gone. But worse than that was the sudden, gut-wrenching realization that this was it. The door to Julian's world, a world I had just begun to help open, was being slammed shut and bolted forever. I looked at him, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of something raw and desperate on his face. He was losing his connection, his one small rebellion. "No," Julian said. The word was quiet, but held an immense, immovable weight. It was the voice of a man who had spent a decade in silence, a man who had forgotten he had the power to refuse. Mrs. Gable actually faltered, her relentless forward momentum pausing for a fraction of a second. "I beg your pardon, Mr. Julian." I said no. He turned his head towards her, his sightless eyes aimed directly at her face. "She stays. She is useful." "Useful?" Mrs. Gable's disbelief was palpable. "Mr. Julian, your father pays a team of the world's best specialists to see to your needs. This girl is a cleaner. She is a risk, an unknown variable. She is not useful." "And yet," Julian countered, his voice gaining strength, "not one of your specialists ever thought to bring me a storm I could hold in my hands, or a memory I could trace with my fingertips." He lifted the beeswax sculpture slightly. "Or hope that smells like honey." The challenge in his voice was unmistakable. He was not just defending me. He was defending our secret world. Mrs. Gable was speechless, her authority evaporating in the face of this unprecedented resistance. She looked from Julian, who now seemed like the master of the room, to me, the lowly maid who had somehow upended a decade of rigid order. Her mind was clearly working, calculating her next move. A direct confrontation with Julian was a battle she couldn't win, not if he was truly determined, but she could still punish me. "Very well, Mr. Julian," she finally conceded, her voice tight with suppressed rage. "As you wish. Miss Miller will remain. For now." The threat hung in the air, heavy and poisonous. She gave me one last look, a silent promise of future retribution, before turning on her heel and marching out of the room, her fury radiating in the perfect stillness she left behind. The silence after she left was different. It wasn't peaceful anymore. It was charged, dangerous. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding, my knees feeling weak. "Thank you," I whispered, my voice trembling. Julian set the beeswax sculpture down carefully on the piano bench beside him. "Her compliance is temporary," he said, his tone grim. "She'll go to my father. She'll frame this in a way that makes you seem like a threat. A gold digger. Someone taking advantage of the poor, blind billionaire's son." He ran a hand through his dark hair, a gesture of frustration that seemed startlingly human. "He'll listen to her. He always does." He was right. This small victory was just a delay of the inevitable. Alistair Vance would hear of this, and his judgment would be swift and final. I would be gone, and Julian would be plunged back into his sterile, silent world, perhaps with even thicker walls than before. The thought was unbearable. "What can we do?" I asked, stepping closer. He was quiet for a long moment, his head tilted down as if in deep thought. When he looked up again, his expression had changed. The resignation was gone, replaced by a spark of something I hadn't seen before, a flicker of cunning, a hint of the man he might have been if his life hadn't taken such a tragic turn. "My father only understands two things," Julian said slowly, a plan clearly forming in his mind. "Power and public image. Right now, you are a nobody, a maid he can dispose of without a second thought. We need to change that. We need to make you untouchable." "Untouchable? How?" I asked, bewildered. He stood up from the piano bench and took a step towards me, his presence suddenly filling the room. My father is hosting his annual Vance Foundation Gala in 2 weeks. It's the biggest philanthropic event of the year. The press, the board members, the city's elite, everyone will be there. He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. And you are going to be my guest. I stared at him, dumbfounded. Me? At a Billionaire'S gala? It was insane. They'll never let me in. I'm the maid. Not if you're with me, he said, a sardonic smile playing on his lips. They can't very well turn away the reclusive son who is finally making his first public appearance in a decade, especially not when he's on the arm of his new muse. He held out his hand, not to take another sculpture, but for me to take. It was a gesture of alliance, a pact. We are going to give them a story they can't resist. We're going to show my father that my world is no longer his to control. I looked at his outstretched hand, then into his clouded, determined eyes. This was more than just saving my job. This was a revolution, quiet and personal, but a revolution nonetheless. It was terrifying and reckless and utterly insane, and I knew, with a certainty that resonated deep in my bones, that I was going to do it. But as my fingers were about to touch his, a chilling thought crept into my mind. He'll see this as the ultimate betrayal, I whispered, my voice barely audible. Your father, what do you think he'll do when he sees us walk in together? Julian's smile vanished, replaced by a grim, hard line. He let his hand drop to his side. My father, he said, his voice dropping to a low, cold whisper, is the man who locked me in this cage for 10 years. What he will do is exactly what we need. He will expose himself. He took a step back, turning his head towards the shuttered windows, as if he could see the world outside. But there's something you don't know about the night of my mother's accident. There's a reason he's kept me hidden. A secret he's protected more carefully than all his billions. The air in the room grew heavy, charged with the weight of a 10-year-old secret. My own problems, my job, my art project, seemed to shrink in the face of the raw pain that suddenly radiated from Julian. This wasn't about a simple act of rebellion anymore. This was about something much deeper, much darker. What secret? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. He remained facing the window, a silhouette against the dim light filtering through the shutters. Everyone knows the official story. A tragic accident on a rain-slicked road. My mother was killed instantly. I was pulled from the wreckage, alive, but blind. He paused, and his voice took on a serrated edge. What no one knows is that my father was driving the other car. The confession hit me with the force of a physical blow. I gasped, my hand flying to my mouth. Alistair Vance. The powerful, untouchable Titan. He hadn't just lost his wife and son in an accident. He had caused it. He was arguing with his mistress on the phone, Julian continued, his voice flat and devoid of emotion, as if he were reciting facts from a textbook. He ran a red light. He never saw us. He walked away without a scratch. His lawyers, his PR team, they buried it. They created the narrative of a grieving husband and a tragic, faceless accident. They paid off the first responders, the witnesses. They sealed me away not just to protect me from the world, but to protect his secret from the world. I am the living evidence of his crime. Suddenly everything made sense. The isolation, the obsessive control, the sterile fortress. It wasn't about protecting Julian. It was about imprisoning the truth. My heart ached for the 16-year-old boy who had lost his mother and his sight, only to be made a prisoner by the very man who should have protected him. Our little conspiracy now felt like a righteous crusade. The gala, I said, my voice firm with newfound resolve. We'll do it. The next 2 weeks were a blur of clandestine preparations. Julian, using a secure, encrypted line he'd had installed years ago, arranged for everything. A designer sworn to secrecy was smuggled in late at night to fit me for a gown, a simple, elegant sheath of midnight blue velvet that felt like liquid moonlight against my skin. He coached me on the layout of the ballroom, which he knew by heart from the blueprints he'd studied. He taught me the names and histories of the keyboard members and philanthropists who would be there. We were no longer just a boy and his maid. We were co-conspirators, generals planning a campaign. During our sessions, I brought him my final, most important work. It was a human-sized bust I had sculpted from rough, coarse clay. The features were indistinct, anonymous, but I had embedded two smooth, polished obsidian stones where the eyes should be. I told him it was truth. He spent hours with it, his fingers tracing every contour, every rough patch, every smooth, cold stone. He was fortifying himself for the battle to come. The night of the gala, my heart felt like it was going to beat out of my chest. Julian stood beside me in the grand foyer, looking impossibly handsome in a perfectly tailored tuxedo. To the outside world, I was just a woman guiding a blind man. But our hands were linked, and I could feel the steady, resolute strength in his grip. As we stepped through the gilded archway into the grand ballroom, a hush fell over the crowd. Gasps rippled through the sea of glitterati. Julian Vance, the ghost of the glass fortress, was here, and he was not alone. We moved through the room, a silent, unmovable island in a river of whispers. I saw Mrs. Gable near the stage, her face a mask of horrified shock. And then I saw him. Alistair Vance, standing mid-conversation with the senator, froze. His wineglass tilted, spilling a few drops of red onto the white tablecloth. His eyes, the same calculating eyes that had dismissed me weeks ago, locked onto us. I saw shock, then confusion, and then a wave of pure, unadulterated fury. He strode towards us, his powerful presence parting the crowd like a ship's bow through water. "Julian," he hissed, his voice a low, dangerous growl meant only for us. "What is the meaning of this, and who is this woman?" Julian turned his head towards the sound of his father's voice, a calm, serene smile on his face. "Father, good to see you too. This is Amelia Miller. She's a gifted artist. In fact, her work has opened my eyes to a great many things." The double meaning was unmistakable. "I believe you're about to announce this year's grant recipient for the Vance Foundation's Emerging Artist Fund." Alistair's face darkened. He knew he was trapped. In front of hundreds of cameras and the most influential people in the city, he couldn't cause a scene. He couldn't have me thrown out. He couldn't drag his son away. He was utterly powerless. "The board has made its decision, yes," he said through gritted teeth. "Excellent," Julian said, his voice ringing with a newfound authority that commanded the attention of everyone nearby. "Because I would like to make a last-minute endorsement. Miss Miller's work explores the world through touch, creating art for those who cannot see, a concept I believe is uniquely suited to the Foundation's mission." He squeezed my hand. "And to demonstrate my faith in her vision, I will be personally matching the Foundation's grant, from my own trust. That is, of course, if the board agrees." The crowd erupted in a murmur of approval. The story was perfect. The reclusive son, emerging from his tragic darkness, guided by a brilliant young artist whom he now wishes to champion. It was a PR masterpiece, and Alistair Vance was caught in its web. To deny the grant now would be a public relations disaster. He looked at Julian, a silent, venomous war passing between them. He saw the truth in his son's sightless eyes. He saw that the cage was broken. With a stiff, almost imperceptible nod, he sealed his own defeat. Later that evening, standing on a quiet balcony overlooking the city lights, Julian turned to me. The roar of the party was a distant hum. "He'll never forgive me for this," he said, though there was no regret in his voice. "You didn't do this for his forgiveness," I replied softly. "You did it for your own freedom." He smiled, a genuine, unburdened smile that transformed his face. "No," he said, reaching out to gently touch my cheek, his fingers tracing my face as if it were a new sculpture. "We did it. For the first time, I don't feel like I'm in the dark anymore." In that moment, I knew my project was complete. I hadn't just made art for a blind man. I had helped him rebuild his world, and in the process, he had completely reshaped mine. The glass fortress was still there, but its walls had become transparent, and for the first time, the light was pouring in.